he got elected for his first 3 years. Now, I want to tell you, it's a little different going from the United States Army to going to work on Capitol Hill. You know, the Army is an organization that prides itself on selfless service, that prides itself on your word is your bond, and taking care of your soldiers first. Capitol Hill, about the closest thing of your word is your bond is that when somebody talks to you, they say, I'll be with you as long as I can. So that's kind of the typical thing that happens in Washington, and what I had to learn during my time up there. After my 6 years on Capitol Hill, I had the opportunity, frankly, I'd been fed up by it, and I had the opportunity to come back to South Carolina. I was the vice president for advancement at Charleston Southern University, had the marketing organization, and also had the alumni organization. So I'm in an unusual situation of never having run for political office, never really thought I would, and then we had a fellow by the name of Barack Obama elected as president, and I watched in dismay, along with the rest of the candidates I think would all agree, and said, Lordy, what are we going to do? And I got, as I watched what was going on, and then when Congressman Brown made the decision not to run, I looked at the race and decided that my background was such that I should run for this office and believe that I am the most qualified candidate to take on the job. One thing I would like to say about being in Washington, D.C., and some people say, well, you've been in Washington, D.C., so therefore you've been tainted in some way. Well, I didn't become a lobbyist. I didn't go over to K Street. I actually came back to South Carolina not expecting ever to go back to Washington except to visit the monuments. So that's kind of my background. Now, what am I running on? There are 3 points that I believe are kind of gives you a general idea of why I'm running. And I put it like this: national defense, national security, economic security, and then constitutional security. The first priority of the federal government is national security. That's what we've really got to be concerned about. National security not only involves the military, it includes where we get our energy, how we protect our borders, but that is an area that obviously my time in the service prepared me well for. Second is economic security. Now, what do I mean by that? There's really 2 parts of that. First is job creation. Now, what can the federal government do to create jobs? It's really just 2 things. It's only 2 things. They can reduce taxes on businesses, in most cases small businesses, and they can reduce regulations on businesses, and particularly small businesses. That's the role of the federal government in job creation. There's some other things that the federal government gets involved with, interstate commerce and some other stuff, but the reality is that's what they're doing. The types of things that President Obama has been doing with the stimulus spending is not the type of thing that will create jobs long term. And that's one thing that Washington has never really figured out. The other part of economic security deals with the debt. We've all talked about this. I agree with probably 95% of what my fellow candidates had to say. Paul Ryan's plan that Mark has talked about going after entitlements is an excellent plan. The bottom line is we're spending our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren's money. And what we're really doing is we're going to pass on an America to our grandchildren that they will not have the same opportunities that we have. So that's what I mean by economic security. The last part is constitutional security. Larry is about as articulate about the Constitution as anybody I've met. He's a lawyer and I'm not, so I won't try to match him word for word about the Constitution. But on most things, I absolutely agree with him. We have people in Washington that believe the Constitution is some sort of guidebook rather than a rule book. And that's what we need to get to. When you really start looking at many of our problems, if we go back to the Constitution, we decide, all right, based on the interpretation of the Constitution, not as a guidebook but as a rule book, what is supposed to be the responsibility of the federal government and what is supposed to be the responsibility of state and local governments become much more clear. Then you start dividing up those pieces. I'll give you an example of something. President Obama, I guess it was now 3 or 4 weeks ago, came out with a plan to spend almost $1 billion to solve the high school dropout rate. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if we cannot solve the high school dropout rate at Hannington High School or Somerville High School or Wando High School right here, I promise you the federal government will not do that. I mean, that's just absolutely nuts. We also talked about some economic things, and we've talked about spending freezes and that kind of stuff. And those are things that we may have to do, but those are only short-term fixes. The reality is you have to pull out the parts of the federal government that shouldn't be there. Department of Education. Frankly, I believe the Energy Department ought to go. I don't think the Energy Department is doing that great a job. There's some things in the Energy Department that needs to be done, but it can be shifted somewhere else. So that's the only way we're really going to lower the spending of the federal government, that we get back to the core issues that the federal government is supposed to have. So I think I'll leave it at that, and then we'll take some questions.